welcome to Solid Rock. We'd like to give people a few seconds just to join in the live stream. Hey, my name's Katie, and I'm part of the team here. Whether you're joining us from Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok, we're just thankful that you are here. For anyone who's new around here, Solid Rock is an online church that aims to see lives transformed by the power of the gospel. We go live every Thursday at 7 p.m., but we're here all week. If you need someone to pray with you or for you, shoot us a message anytime. Hey, I'll hang out with you. Why not? We're good. All right. So, in the meantime, feel free to drop in some comments. Let us know where you're coming from and how many people are in the room. That's our favorite. The only reason being, we love when people watch live and then get your friends together and then essentially just have like a nice little jam fest or like a little discussion. It's always fun, and having snacks is always a plus because no one likes hunger. If you think this is worthwhile, please feel free to share with your friends, spread the word. I think we're almost ready here, so I'm going to pray for us real quick while we wait for Nathan to come on and give us some good old message. All right, so God, thank you so much for having us all here today, and please just help Nathan to have a clear idea of what he wants to say. We know he has it planned, but help it to come out right and help us to all just get something great from it, and help me not to say anything more silly than I've already said. Have a great day, guys. And Nathan, you're on.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. And I just might be the first person to tell you Happy Easter, because that's what's kind of interesting about when we do church on Thursday. This is our Easter service. And, I know it's not Easter yet, but I think it's totally fair because Jesus is risen today, too. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
That's right.
And we can celebrate that anytime you want. It doesn't have to be just the one magical day a year that's Easter. And so we're going to go ahead and celebrate it today because I gave you a preview last week, but Easter's about the resurrection, and that is the most important thing ever. Everything hinges on the resurrection of Jesus. Christianity is not based on the Bible. It's based on an event that Jesus rose from the dead. And I'm going to remind you that what we had last week, we saw that Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:14, if Christ has not been raised, then all our preaching is useless and your faith is useless. It's important. It's a big deal. The problem is, over the years, there has been so much of tradition and art and stories and movies and books and pictures and all of this stuff around Easter, around the crucifixion and resurrection, that we have kind of a distorted picture of what it looks like. When we think about Easter, when we think of the resurrection, we're seeing it through that lens, and it's kind of obscuring the real story. To make matters worse, we tend to skip over some of the really significant details that are actually in the Bible, that the Gospels actually tell us. And consequently, we end up with this not a clear idea of what it really was, what it really means, what it's all about, and how we can trust it. Because like we saw, if it isn't real, then this is all pointless. We need this to be real. We need to be able to trust it in the core of who you are. And so that's what I want to try to help you with tonight. And so the first thing is, just like I said last week, before you can have a resurrection, you've got to be dead. And I'm knocking things down. Simply put, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. This is just a fact of history. This isn't for the Bible tells me so, although it does. All four Gospels and repeated references in the rest of the New Testament, along with a bunch of prophecies in the Old Testament, that all tells us Jesus died on a cross, but also multiple secular historians, people totally outside of the Bible, people who weren't affiliated with Jesus, had no love or loyalty for him. They're just recording things that were noteworthy events in first century Roman Empire. And a couple of them recorded that this guy, Jesus of Nazareth, was crucified by the Romans. That's a very clear-cut thing. That means he's dead. And you can find skeptics out there, and there's this thing, they call it the swoon theory. That's basically the idea that, well, Jesus didn't really die. He just, I mean, yeah, he was pretty beat up and he lost a lot of blood, so he fainted, he passed out on the cross. But then when they put him in the tomb, like the cool dampness in there kind of revived him and he came back, and somehow he rolled a massive stone out of the way and recovered from severe internal trauma. I ignore all that part because it's absurd theory. It's utterly preposterous because these Romans who killed him, this was their thing. Like, crucifixion was not new. It had been invented a couple hundred years earlier by the Persians, and maybe someday I'll go into detail of it, like how it evolved over the years, but let's just say the Romans perfected it. It was this carefully orchestrated thing to maximize the pain and suffering and to ensure death, but to like postpone it as long as possible. They wanted to prolong how long you were in severe pain and, you know, abject humiliation, because crucifixion was literally the sentence when it's like something worse than death, when just killing you wasn't enough. If they just wanted you dead, they cut your head off. But if they wanted to really punish you, you got crucified. And these Roman soldiers, these officers were experts in this, in pain and death. It was their job to torture and kill people, and they were scary good at it. The concept of them mistaking an unconscious man for a dead man is laughable, but they didn't take those kind of chances, because especially if one of those Roman officers failed in their duty, like if they failed to actually kill that guy, then they received the sentence themselves. They would have been crucified for messing up a crucifixion. So they didn't take any kind of chances. We actually see that in John. They came along because usually they left people trying to stretch it out and make them suffer. But in this particular crucifixion, it was right before the Passover. They didn't want to leave stuff out there. And so they came to hurry things along. But it says when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead. So they didn't break his legs, which is how you hurry things along. But even at that, they saw he was already dead. They already saw that. But they're not going to take any chance at all. So one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water flowed out. Like, he's already dead before that happens. And if you weren't, that one's going to be fatal. But that actually also tells us the cause of death. Interestingly, the blood and water coming out is the pericardial sac. Jesus' heart had ruptured. And so, in possibly the most literal example of history, he died of a broken heart. Just I don't know, I call it a fun nugget, it's a creepy nugget, I'm not sure. But the point is, he's dead. There is zero doubt. Like, not only are they really good at their job, but like they double check and made sure. And so then after he's dead, he was buried. And to Westerners like us, that's well, yeah, that's what you do with a dead person. But that's a weird anomaly for a crucified person. You didn't bury someone who was crucified. Those bodies were left on the cross to rot. That was part of the punishment. Like I said, this was the punishment worse than death. This was all about making a person an example and saying, if you do what this guy did, you're going to suffer what he suffered. And so you weren't allowed to take a body off the cross because it was Roman property. It was a crime to try to take that body. And that's what makes it so important. All four Gospels introduce a man right at this moment in the story. He's nowhere before this. Nobody has any mention of him before this, but every single one of them puts him in the story here where he enters in. That's a bigger deal than we usually realize. There's not a lot of things that are in all four Gospels. It's only a handful of different stories and stuff that make the cut in every single one. And this guy, best known as Joseph of Arimathea, like, because he's introduced, he's a man named Joseph from the town of Arimathea. Theologians are not creative with names, so he's Joseph of Arimathea. But he comes in, we find out from the different tellings in the four Gospels that he was like one of the Jewish leaders. He was a respected leader, but he wasn't one of the Jewish leaders that had consented to killing Jesus. He was like not so much on board with that, but he hadn't gone public because he was afraid of the other guys. I mean, probably earlier on he might have been afraid of losing his position or reputation, but towards the end it's like, dude, if I stand up with him, like, they're freaking out and killing this guy. Are they going to kill me too? But at this point in the story, after Jesus is dead, Joseph says, hang it all, I'm going public. He steps forward, he goes straight to the governor and asks for permission to get Jesus' body. That was a gutsy move. But again, we have in that story that Pilate was surprised that Jesus was dead, and he confirmed with the soldiers, and they said, yes, he's dead. It's probably that same guy who stabbed him with the spear said, yeah, I double checked. But like they confirmed repeatedly, he is dead. But then this is such a critical thing for the whole story, because Joseph takes him and he takes Jesus' body. They prepare it for burial, kind of in a hurry because the Sabbath is approaching and they just need to get this hurry up and done. But they wrap his body in linen, and his pal Nicodemus shows up, which that's another really important thing, that there's so much meaning in that I can't get myself sidetracked on tonight, or we'll never get to the actual resurrection part. But Nicodemus shows up with 75 pounds of spices to anoint the body, and that's part of what they wrap it up in with the linen and stuff. Just a side note, if on the nonsense off chance that Jesus wasn't already dead, this would have suffocated him. But they take him and they put him in the tomb. The Gospels tell us it's a new tomb. I'm not sure why that was important, but it's brand new. It's one that Joseph had made, probably planning for himself, and conveniently he does get it back in a few days. But they put Jesus in Joseph's tomb, and that's an important thing, because without this happening, the idea of a resurrection would have been so much more of a thought, and I think it might have happened, but this was actually how they enabled proof, because everybody knew where the body should have been. Without this happening, like if Jesus' body had been left on the cross, like most crucified people were, and then just the body disappears, it would have been like, I mean, someone came and took it overnight, and who knows what really happened. But no, he was sealed in this tomb. And then that tomb was unsealed, which is a big deal, and the body's not there. Something happened here. And we're going to get into more of that as we go. But it's funny to me that while these guys are doing that, and like I said, they're hurrying, there's some women watching from a distance, and apparently they didn't trust these guys to get it done right, because you see later on, Mark 16:1, when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out and purchased burial spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. Like, they clearly didn't trust these guys. Although I told you Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of spices. That's actually crazy. Typical was like 5, maybe 10 for an important person. 75 is like a king's funeral. This is way lavish over the top. But the ladies didn't think he had done it right, and they're like, well, okay, well, they put him in there, but we'll anoint his body later. The thing is, they were planning to come back and anoint a dead body, because no one expected a resurrection. At that point in time, everybody said, Jesus is dead, story over. The disciples, his followers, they all scattered when he was arrested. They ran for their lives. And we know that at least a couple of them are back together by Sunday morning. We're not sure when they get together, how many of them get together, until like Sunday night we know they're gathered as a group. But for this period of time, they are terrified, they are hiding. They assume that either A, those Jewish leaders that hated Jesus so much probably hate us too, and they're going to try to get rid of us, or B, the charges the Jews brought to Rome to get Jesus crucified was they said he was like a rebel leading an insurrection. And if Rome actually believed that, then part of stamping out an insurrection is not just taking out the leader, but they would crucify his followers too. So they had good reason to believe that their lives were just as in danger. And so they're hiding. They're not sitting there counting down. It's like, okay, he said he'll be back in 3 days, and here we go. Like, they're terrified and hiding. The crazy thing is, it's his enemies that remember the whole 3 days stuff. You see that? In Matthew, it says, the next day on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. Time out. This on the Sabbath? This is Passover. This is not just on any Sabbath, on Saturday. This is Passover. It's like the most important day of their year. It is the festival that they didn't want there to be problems in it. You read earlier in the story, they were all about, we can't have something going nuts during during the Passover. On the Sabbath, they go to see Pilate, who's a Gentile, by the way. This is a shockingly unclean thing for them to do. And this shows how much they were against Jesus. They were willing to go to these lengths. But they told him, "Sir, we remember what the deceiver once said while he was still alive. After 3 days, I will rise from the dead." They remember the prophecy. They don't think it's actually going to happen, though. They're just saying, "We request that you seal the tomb until the 3rd day." Notice, it's the tomb. Everybody knows which tomb. But this will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everyone he was raised from the dead. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first. That hoax that they're trying to prevent only matters. That is only a convincing anything if everybody knows exactly where the body should be. And that only happened because of Joseph and Nicodemus, which is why Andy Stanley did a message a few years back that's called Nick and Joe Save Easter. I suggest you find that on YouTube. It's awesome. But they post guards outside the tomb. They get an official Roman seal on it, which basically means it's illegal to move this stone on pain of death. They post guards in front of it who are, authorized to kill anyone who comes to even attempt to move the stone. And they're waiting there until the 3rd day to make sure no one can pretend that he rose from the dead. Which makes this next part funny, because now the Bible just goes silent for 2 days. And it's crazy to me. Like, this is the pivotal moment in history. This is the time between the crucifixion and the resurrection, and there's nothing. The Bible says nothing. And it's just so weird to me how it just goes dark. But then, the part that we're all waiting for is Sunday morning. That's when it gets cool. Matthew tells us, "Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint." Now, you can read the Bible boring if you want to, but that's not what I see here. This cracks me up. Because there was a great earthquake for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven. That sounds to me like he caused the earthquake. All right? And so I'm seeing this guy just like rocketing from heaven, probably full-on superhero landing right in front of these guards. Freaks them out, and he rolls aside the stone and sat on it. I don't know why he sat on it, but it makes me chuckle. And like, they're so terrified. I picture this angel coming in, like I said, just crazy entrance, superhero landing in front of him, probably just like locks eyes with him the whole time, just grabs that stone and tosses it out of the way, sits on it, and probably gives him a people's eyebrow or something. That it's this, what are you going to do about it? Because they're supposed to be guarding this. That's New Living Translation I just had that said they fell into a dead faint. Different translations. In the Greek, it's not quite clear whether these guys were just cowering in fear or if they full-on passed out. But in either case, they're not guarding diddly at this point. But still, nobody was expecting a resurrection. Those guards certainly were not expecting that to happen, and we're not sure what happens to them. Like, they never show up in, like, any of the other people coming around don't see those guards. But we know that something that did happen with them, and it's a story that Matthew gives us, and it does matter. But it says, a meeting with the elders was called. They decided to give those soldiers a large bribe. And they told the soldiers, "You must say, Jesus' disciples came during the night while we were sleeping and stole his body." Which again is stupid. Because not only were these trained soldiers and the disciples were like fishermen and a tax collector and something, like, they were not going to defeat these soldiers. But if it's, oh, they came while we were sleeping, we're just really, really terrible at our job, that's what happened. And it's like, again, they would have been killed for that. Yeah. And that's why it goes on and they said, oh, if the governor hears about it, we'll stand up for you so you won't get in trouble. And which makes me wonder if they did. And it's like, or did this get back to the governor and the leading priests were like, oh, there's some lousy guards, and just wrap up loose ends? I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. But the guards accepted the bribe, said what they were told to say, and their story spread widely among the Jews, and they still tell it today. Matthew included this story because he's plainly saying, look, guys, I know you've heard this story, and it's a load of bull. That's not what happened. This is where that story came from. Like, they were bribed to spread that story. Because what really happens on Sunday, like I said, everything else that happens at the tomb, the guards are just not there. They probably Either they ran as soon as the angel got there, or they ran when they woke back up after the angel got there. But you have women who come to the tomb. Like I said, they were coming because they didn't think that Nick and Joe took care of the body the right way. And it tells us that, like, as they're on their way, they knew about the stone because they had watched Joseph put the stone in front of it. They didn't know what had happened after that. They didn't know that there was a guard posted and that it had been sealed and stuff. But it tells us on the way there, they're like, hey, what are we going to do about that stone? Who will we get to move that for us? And I love that they don't have a plan, but they're going anyway. They're like, we're going to go do this, and you know what? We'll figure it out. But they don't know anything about the guards. It didn't matter. By the time they get there, there's no guards and there's no stone. Luke tells us, very early Sunday morning, women went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. So they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. As they stood there puzzled, two men suddenly appeared to them, clothed in dazzling robes. Don't miss this. They show up, and they see the stone's not there. They're like, that's curious. They go in, they don't find the body, and they stood there puzzled. They do not immediately go, oh, he's risen. It's like no one was taking minimal evidence and jumping to a conclusion of resurrection. Nobody expected it. None of them saw this coming. And it's not until, two men suddenly appear to them clothed in dazzling robes, which people pretty much universally agree. Those were angels. They give them the story. They tell them that Jesus is risen. And it's like, guys, why are you looking in the tomb? He's alive. He told you he would come back on the third day. Remember that? Yeah, he did that. Go get his disciples. Tell them he did what he said he was going to do. And so those disciples were not the ones who came Sunday morning. They're still hiding. It was the women who came. We're going to circle back to that because it's important. But Jesus eventually comes to the disciples. But the first thing that happened is after those women were at the tomb and the angel told them all about it, they went directly to the disciples like they were told to do, and they told them everything that happened. And they didn't believe them. One of the Gospels, I think it might be Mark, I'm not sure, don't quote me on it, but it says, like, it just sounded like nonsense to them. They're like, oh, these hysterical women, who knows what they're thinking. And they completely blew it off, which is why when Jesus comes to them later, and still later, he appeared to the 11 disciples as they were eating together. He rebuked them for their stubborn unbelief because they refused to believe those who had seen him after he'd been raised from the dead. Like, not only had he told them repeatedly, I've just been reading it this week in Mark, that it's so nuts how very plainly he spelled it out to them. And it's like, I'm going to die. I'll be back on the third day. They're like, wonder what that means. But then even when the women showed up and told him, they still didn't listen. And Jesus yelled at them for it. Like, guys, what does it take for you to understand, for you to actually listen? And even while Jesus is there doing that, they're still hanging back on, oh, they still don't think it's a resurrection. Jesus is standing there in front of them and they still don't think resurrection. They think it's a ghost. Like, oh no, it's the ghost of Jesus. And then Jesus is like, why are you so frightened? Why are your hearts filled with doubt? Look at my hands. Look at my feet. Everyone pretty much agrees. He's showing them where the nails had been. But he said, touch me. Make sure that I'm not a ghost. Ghosts don't have bodies, but you can see that I do. It doesn't say it, but maybe this is sacrilegious. I hope that Jesus slapped somebody and said, did you feel that? Like, I'm not a ghost. It was probably Peter. But, and even that, they're still not trusting it. They still don't believe it. He eventually goes, then he asked them, do you have anything here to eat? They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it as they watched, which is, again, a really funny scene if you picture this. Because it's 11 scared guys, probably hiding in one corner, while Jesus is sitting there at the table going, yum, yum, good. I eat with my mouth like a human. I'm not a ghost. And, it would be such a crazy thing to watch this happen. And he's like, guys, what is it going to take to convince you of this? But all that's just showing that this was not the fantasy that they had all hoped would happen. And so they talked themselves into it. None of them thought, in fact, they give us the story of how embarrassingly bad they did at accepting the story. How much evidence they got, and they were still going, oh, I don't know. Like later on, after this, there's a point in Matthew that they're on a mountaintop. There's a whole crowd of people around, and Jesus is there teaching them. It's like giving them basically the Great Commission, the last thing before he goes off to heaven. And it says, many worshiped him and some doubted. And it's like people are standing there going like, well, I mean, there's Jesus and all, but I don't know. Maybe I'm on candid camera. And it's like, I don't know what was going on with these people. But the fact that they tell us, like, they embarrass themselves with the story to tell us the truth is a big part of why we can trust the story, because it made them look bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's one thing I really wish we had more information on. Like, I want this to be the better evidence. I just got to throw it in because it's my favorite piece of it, and we miss this part of the story all the time. Matthew tells us this is right when Jesus dies. It says, the earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. That's all we get. That is the whole story of this. We have like a mass resurrection of, to read that, it's like we got David and Gideon and Ruth, and they're in here just rolling through the city, probably going like, hey, you see that Home Depot? That used to be an empty field. I played Little League over there. But it's these guys are just walking through Jerusalem. Many people saw them, and nothing else about it. So crazy. But the important reasons that we can trust it, and you can even trust that part, that these other people showed up, is the evidence that the only way a hoax would have worked is if everybody knew where the body was. That is such a key piece. Everyone knew exactly what to expect from a crucifixion. They knew exactly where Jesus had been buried. They knew that there was a guard and there was a seal on it. But the seal is broken, the stone's tossed aside, and the tomb is empty, and that begs an explanation. And you can guarantee that those Jewish leaders wanted to give an explanation. They gave the story that's like, oh, they came and stole the body. Now, there's a detail I didn't give you, but the cloth that he was wrapped in was left behind, and it's like really nonsense thing that somebody would come in, unwrap the body, steal the naked body, but leave the cloth behind. No one's doing that. But everybody knew where this was. This empty tomb was a thing. And that so much of this happened right in the place where it should have been easy to disprove it. The story spread like wildfire right then and right there, where it should have been simple for someone to come over and say, no, look, it's right here. You went to lot A, it's lot B, you're looking at the wrong tomb. If it could have been proved wrong, it would have been simple, but nobody could. Mm. And there's also, I've told you that it was really important that you have women as the key witnesses. They're the first ones that saw him. That mattered because women were not trusted in this society. A woman couldn't testify in court because no one really gave much credence to what a woman said. That's like we saw the disciples treated them the same way. But that's why it matters that you get a story like Mark tells us after Jesus rose from the dead early on Sunday morning, the first person who saw him, that's a significant thing, was Mary Magdalene. By the way, Mark, this is Peter's version of the story. It feels like it should have been Peter to be the first person to see Jesus, but it wasn't. It was Mary Magdalene, the one from whom he had cast out 7 demons. Now, they don't trust women in general. I doubt they trust one who used to have 7 demons, but she was one of the close ones who was with them throughout his ministry. And she went to the disciples who were grieving and weeping, told them what had happened, but when she told them that Jesus was alive and she had seen him, they didn't believe her. And again, this is an embarrassment to them. You saw Jesus come and rebuke them for not believing her. If this was a fake story, they would have left that detail out. They would have made themselves look better if they could have helped it. Mm-hmm. And that's another piece of why we can trust this story. These are things that if you take it and don't call it the Bible, but just call it ancient documents, this is how historians view ancient documents and how you determine, are they trustworthy? Are they credible? These are some of the details. And when things like that show up, it adds to the credibility of that document. And that's part of what we're seeing here. And like I already told you, this all happened in the exact time and place where if it could have been disproven, it would have been, but it wasn't. And probably the biggest thing is that you could not shut these disciples up from this point forward. These are the guys who ran for their lives when a dozen guards showed up with clubs and torches. Now, from this day forward, nothing will stop these guys. They are given repeated beatings, imprisonments, death threats, most of which eventually turn out to be more than threats, and they all actually do get executed. There is a slight exception with John. They tried to execute him, he just didn't die, it freaked everybody out. But nothing could shut these guys up. And it wasn't just like, oh, one person had a dream about Jesus. Like Paul wrote about 20 years later, that he's talking about it and giving the proof of why I can trust the resurrection. Trust the resurrection. I'm talking too fast, I'm sorry. But after that, he was seen by more than 500 of his followers at one time. Most of them were still alive, though some have died. And they're like, guys, this is not a mass hallucination. 500 people don't all imagine the same thing at one time. And that most of them are still out there. Go ahead and ask them if you want. I mean, it's been 20 years. Some of them have died off. But out of 500, we got quite a few left. And you don't have to believe me. Go ask them. They're still there. And that's what matters so much. This is the same stuff. It's just a few verses later that he said that if this isn't real, then we're all wasting our time and we're actually all making fools of ourselves. And it's everything. And this is the resurrection. This is from death to life. This is what Jesus does. And that the same way that he went from death to life is what he then turns around and offers to us. That's what he wants to do for you. He wants to take you from death to life. Jesus is not about like a reformation project. He's not trying to improve your life, because your life is not like just a little off and you need Jesus to help clean some things up. Jesus says, no, you're actually dead and I want to bring you to life. That's what he does. And that's what I pray that he does with you. Like I said, those disciples could not be silenced. Nothing would shut these guys up. And they kept going. The message spread to Jerusalem, to the whole region, to the whole Roman Empire, to the whole known world. And eventually it kept going. It covered the planet. A couple thousand years later, it found me on the other side of the globe. And it's like, and I pray that this whole celebration, this good news finds you. If tonight is the first time it's found you, if it's this light is suddenly breaking through for you and you're seeing that I see this, I trust it, I can believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that's all it takes. I repeatedly show you Romans 10:9. I don't have it on here, but it's one of my favorites. I was just simplify it that if you believe and say so, if you believe and trust this resurrection and simply confess it and say, yes, I'm ready to follow Jesus, that's all it takes. And he will go with you. He will guide you. And if you want a little more guidance, if you want like a person to help guide you, you can text the word rooted to 864-865-0043. Go ahead and take a screenshot. It'll probably show up in comments. But if you send this text, not only do you get access to a bunch more teaching from my pastor, who like doesn't go all over the place like I have been tonight, but he will help to explain stuff, but more importantly, that connects you to a real person who will talk to you, who will answer questions, who will pray with you, and really get you started on this journey of a new life, of being raised from death to life. Because that's what Easter's all about. That's what Solid Rock is all about. That's what all of this is for. That's the bottom line. That's all there is to it. So, let me pray for us. Lord, I just thank you for the glory of Easter, for the miracle of raising from death to life, and that it doesn't stop with Jesus. It's not just this amazing thing that happened one time, but it's the thing that you long to do in each and every one of us. And I thank you for your life, and I pray that everyone hearing this will hear your voice, not mine, and that they will hear you speaking of what you want in their lives, and give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do it. Amen. Thanks, guys. See you next week.